we're live here in Door County, Sturgeon Bay Library today, and we have author Valerie Clarizio here to talk to us about her novels. She also works in the Sturgeon Bay government and uses some of her experience to write her books. And I read the latest one that just came out called Fraudulent Encounters, and I thought it was really, really fun to read. Valerie is a best-selling USA Today author, and she also runs a Facebook group for romance writers. Valerie?
Thank you, Laura, and thanks to the Door County Library for having me here today to talk about my books and my writing process. A little bit about me. I am a native of Door County. I started writing about 10 years ago, and since that time I've published 17 works, mostly romantic suspense, a few contemporary romance, and some of those are novellas. My background is finance, so during the day I do finance, during the night I write books. And when I told my friends and my family that I had penned a novel, hadn't shopped it out to any place yet or any agents or editors, I just said that I actually wrote a book, and they all assumed I had written an accounting textbook because of my background. And I thought, oh man, these people don't know me at all, and their family and friends. But anyhow, so about a decade ago, I started writing, and the first book that I finished is the fourth book that I actually published, because I learned a lot through that time frame. I thought writing a book would be easy, and that part kind of was. And so my first step then was to start shopping that book out to agents and editors. And when you do that, you don't really get responses if they're going to pass on your book. So you do this, and you wait weeks and weeks and weeks for a response, and then there's nothing. And so finally at some point, someone suggested that I join a writers group. So I did that. There was a Wisconsin Romance Writers Group in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So I went to one of their meetings, and a kind lady there took mercy upon me, and she offered to look at the manuscript that I was currently working on, which is actually the fourth book that I had started and ended up being the first book published. So this kind lady took my book, she read it, and in Word, she marked it up, and she told me everything that I was doing wrong with that book, very politely. And when I opened the document, when I got it back from her, if you're experienced with working in Word, you'll know what redlining is. There was so much red in that manuscript, I wanted to cry. And I thought, she must think that I don't know anything about what I'm doing. But until she pointed out things to me, like how to stay in POV, and there were just so many other things that she pointed out to me, but until she actually highlighted it in my manuscript and told me what was going on, I didn't understand. And so I went through that entire manuscript, read all of her comments, tried to learn from her, and at the very last page, she had written on there, "This is a really good story." So I just kind of smiled, after opening it and seeing all the red and all the line out and then reading all the comments. At the very end, she said it was a good story. So that made me very happy and gave me the motivation to continue. So I rewrote that book, and the next time I shopped it to a small press, I had 2 offers on that book. But again, until this woman had told me, all the do's and don'ts, I just didn't know. So I'm often asked the best piece of advice. People will say, what's the best piece of advice you can give us? And I would say, join a writers group, because there you will learn so much from everyone. And without that, I'd probably still have a stack of manuscripts sitting on my desk that nobody wants. But anyhow, so that's a little bit of the story about how I began. And
Are you still working with the group in Green Bay?
I do. It's so motivating to go down, and they meet in Green Bay, they meet once a month, and I find it extremely motivating to meet with all these folks. There's some really prolific people in the group, and there's beginners in the group. Everybody's at a different stage, and that's what's really helpful to me. So, writers group, without it, I don't know where I'd be right now, probably not writing books.
It makes me think of the book that I read recently, Fraudulent Encounter. It's driving down on the highway to Green Bay from Sturgeon Bay. That was so much fun.
That's right, there is a scene in that book where the main couple, they do go to Green Bay for an event.
Yeah.
Without giving too much away, and I figured why not write it on the highway. We've all traveled the highway plenty of times, so I should be able to give that description, right?
Yeah.
So yes, the book that we are kind of talking about today is my latest release. It came out in August, and it's called A Fraudulent Encounter. It's the third book in my Crime and Passion Stalk City Hall series. Working at City Hall, I vowed I'd never write a book about City Hall, but after several books, they say write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
So City Hall came to mind, and so the first book, and I like to write books about people that are in normal jobs, like I would be in a normal job. So the first book has the police investigator and the code enforcer, and it's called The Code Enforcer. The second book has the person who drives the street sweeper and a part-time secretary in the police department. And now this third book talks about it involves the police chief and then actually my position, which is the finance director. And I do a lot of books, they're romantic suspense, so there's a lot of kidnapping or murder or those sorts of things. And I wanted to take a little different spin, so I started working a little bit more with like computer fraud and those kinds of things. And the book that I'm working on now has a little bit of computer crime as well, just changing it up a little bit. So.
And did you ever consider, since you are in a job like that, you write about abusing a pen name or something like that? Or
looking back now, I probably should have used a pen name. That might have been the wiser choice. But when I was trying to come up with a pen name, this writer group that I belonged to in Green Bay, a couple of them said, with a name as pretty as yours, why would you use a pen name? And I thought, well, that was just like the nicest thing I've ever heard.
Very nice.
And I picked my last name, I guess, when I married Rick, but I didn't get to pick my first name, so. Yeah, I thought about it, and then sometimes when you write different things, so I write mostly romantic suspense, if you branch off and write something else, if I were to write paranormal or something like that, I'd probably pick a pen name, just so that, to keep those identities different for the type of book. But in contemporary and romantic suspense, I just stick with what I know, my name.
Yeah.
So.
And how do you choose the names for your characters? They're kind of unusual.
And
I hadn't heard of Daxon.
That's a good question, because I put a lot of thought into names. In most of my books, not this one though, I guess, I use like historical names sometimes, like Italian last names, just because I have an Italian last name. So a lot of my heroes will have Italian last names. And first names, I will pick names by meanings. Especially I did that particularly in the time travel romance ones, because, like I wanted the name to mean something that matched the character. So like it would be a warrior type match. So I spent a lot of time, probably way too much time picking names. As for Daxon, I just thought it was a really cool name. There was really no meaning behind that one. So I'm busted there.
But that is a very unusual name, so it really works.
Yeah,
we can't identify anyone here in town with that name.
No,
So that
you
helps a lot, right?
You might see similarities in some characters, but the names are changed to protect the innocent.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, is do you write characters based on real people?
In a sense, yes. One thing that I learned in said writer's group was when you have a character, you need to stay consistent with that character. So we'll use Dax for an example. In my mind, I have a real person in mind, and when I'm writing Dax's dialogue, I will say to myself, what would so-and-so say if they answered this question? So that I can keep Dax's dialogue really dialed in to a specific way, specific person. I won't tell you who the person is, but so I find that helpful. I create what I call a little book Bible, and in there I will have all my names listed for all the characters, and I'll say, this person personality traits are like this person that I know in real life. So every time I do an action or a dialogue, it sounds like the person I know in real life.
Mhm.
It just helps me keep things straight. I didn't know that in the beginning, so maybe I got lucky, I don't know, but one of those things that you learn along the way.
I've heard a lot of authors say that once they've made a character, that the character kind of tells them where they want certain things to go or how they want certain actions to happen and how they just perceive the world of the book. Do you have that happen to you?
That does happen. When I started writing, I just started writing. I didn't plot anything out, and the book took a total different direction than I thought it would take because of exactly what you're saying. The characters eventually speak to you. After you get a few books under your belt, you start to, I think most people start to plot a little more. I can't speak for everyone, but I do a fair amount of plotting now, and I always know how my book's gonna start. I know a couple of the midpoints, and I know how it's gonna end, but sometimes my character will derail me
In the middle.
and I'll have to circle back around and get over to where I want to be. On rare occasion, the end of the plotting that I did for the end of the book will change because something better comes to mind, so we'll just do it.
Mhm.
But yeah, there was a woman one time, she was telling me she was so involved in her book that one morning for breakfast, she's sitting at the breakfast table with her husband, and she says to her husband, "Don't forget about the wedding this weekend." And he said, "Oh my gosh, who's getting married?" And she's like, "Nobody. That's what I'm writing. Never mind, we're not going to a wedding this weekend." It almost becomes so real sometimes when you're really involved in it.
So
that's kind of
more
fun.
so than when you read a book and you get really engrossed in the book, more so when you're actually writing it and coming up with the ideas.
You know, I want to say yes, but then I want to say no, because I have read books, and I'm sure you have too, where you're so involved in that character that if a book makes you cry, then you are probably as involved with that character than that author was writing that character, if that makes sense. Because it's a fake person and you're crying over this, but it happens. Or laughing or anything like that. So, yeah, interesting.
So with the first book that you had two publishers agree to publish, you went ahead with the commercial publishers, but you told me at one point that you then decided against that. Can you tell us more about that? That's a very interesting thing. I've heard it mostly done the other way around, where people self-publish and then they're scrounging around trying to find publishers. So what is the story behind your writing?
So, I will always be very grateful to my first publishers, because you learn a lot through that process. There are some parts that are much easier when you have a publisher, and there are other parts that are much easier when you self-pub. So the first time through it, the publisher will get your cover out. The publisher will have an editor for you. They will have a proofreader for you. They will kind of line you up a little bit about when the book should be released. So it was nice to have someone walk me through all of that. But then you also have to meet their time constraints. And when you work full-time, sometimes that can be difficult. Like, you know, when I published the first Spinelli book, they wanted to know when the next one was coming. Well, it depends on how many crises I have, right? Like anybody else, but you know, when you're at your job for the better part of the week, you can't really react as quick. So you run up against deadlines, which ended up being okay for me, but there was a little pressure there. When you self-publish, so I had 3 different publishers, and eventually I thought, you know, I'm just going to self-pub. Of course, if I had one of the big publishers, I'd so be there. But you find, even when you have a small publisher, you have to do all the promotion yourself. And then with a small publisher, you don't get control of the pricing. So sometimes you want to run a promotion or a sale, and you can't do that when you have a small publisher unless you get their permission, and that all takes so much time. If I self-pub it, now that I've learned a few things along the way, I can do those promotions. Tomorrow I can run a promotion on one of my books if I want. I don't have to get permission from anybody. I can just do it. The downside of self-pubbing is I had to find my own editor. I had to find my own cover art. I have to find my own proofreader. And now I'm working, you know, a bunch of contracts and trying to time everybody right. I get to pick though when I release it, and if all of a sudden I don't think I can make a time frame, I can just adjust it because it's my own time frame. So there are certainly good things about having a publisher, and there are certainly good things about self-pubbing. So I did go that direction just because I wanted the leeway. I went from publisher to self-pubbing so I could have more control over those things. I could see myself going back to the publisher at some point, maybe when I'm retired and I don't have to worry about time constraints. You know, that was the biggest thing, I think. But boy, they sure can make life easy sometimes too if you have a publisher.
Mm-hmm. So what would be your advice to a new writer to, seek a publisher to start with, to learn the ropes, or self-publish, or what?
I kind of like the way I did it. I think if I would tell a new writer, of course submit to agents, because the agents are what will get you into the bigger publishing houses. But that will take a lot of time and a lot of energy, and you may not ever get an agent, therefore you will never get into some of these publishing houses. I would try that for a while. I don't think that was a mistake on my part. I learned stuff through the process. But if you're finding it's taking too much time, I would just self-pub it. If you can't get an agent or an editor in a decent amount of time, I probably spent too much time doing it, but I just self-pub it because that's what you're there for. You're excited to get it out there. But it's also very scary to put your book out there because someone's going to read it who may not like it, and you have to deal with that too.
Have you had anything like that happen, or do people generally say positive things?
Most people will say positive things, and you find that even if you're reading reviews, it may not be the book for somebody, but generally someone will have something positive to say, and they might even start with, well, this isn't really the book that I normally read, but what I found was this, and they'll be nice. But I always laugh about one that when you get that first review that's not exactly nice, it hurts. It hurts a little bit, and I look back and I think I wrote a book set by my cabin. My cabin's in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I've been going to that cabin since 1989. This book came out a handful of years ago, and one of the reviewers said, "This author has obviously never spent any time in the UP or she would know, blah, blah, blah," whatever it was. And I thought, only 30 years, but okay. But you gotta take that. That's the nature, we want reviews. So we ask people to do reviews, and we have to accept that they just may not like the book. And that's okay.
What was wrong with that reviewer, though, that they couldn't pick up on that, the fact that you did know the area?
Well, they obviously didn't read my bio, because my cabin in the UP is in my bio. I never really understood what part she didn't like or what part she didn't believe. You don't get that dialogue back and forth, so I don't know. I described animals, wildlife. Rick and I spend a lot of time outside, so we see a lot of wildlife, so I don't know if she thought I didn't describe something in her mind correctly about that. I really don't know.
It's puzzling.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I do wonder. And that review was a while ago, and I think about it frequently. There's only so much you can do.
Where do you find your inspiration for your stories and your plots?
So
You said some of the characters are based on real people, but
these, for a fraudulent encounter, there's a fraud crime, a financial crime, and something very similar to that happened in a community, and I read it in a newspaper, and then we talked about it at a lot of our work conferences. So I do pick up a lot of stuff from the news, because sometimes the things that happen, you can't make that up, right? When you see those stories on the news. And I have a brother who used to work for the sheriff's department, so he would have some ideas. Sometimes the police department will call me up at work because they have an idea. Heck, even the fire department on occasion has an idea. But
an idea for a novel,
or an idea for a plot in a novel.
Wow.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, we read this story, something happened in, I don't know, Milwaukee or Sheboygan or wherever, I was thinking if we just twisted that a little bit, you could have a really good story here. And I'm like, if we just twisted that? But it's funny because I always listen to them because even if I don't like the idea, it might spark another idea. So a lot of news, TV shows, you get an idea of a little twist of something. You know, if you're watching some sort of crime thing, and sometimes I think, wow, if it had just happened this way, imagine how that could go. So, but a lot of people like to tell you their ideas too once they find out you're right, which I think is great because there are things I would never think of that I hear from others. So, yeah. That and everybody thinks they're the hero of your next book. Every male person that you meet thinks they're the hero of your next book, or they have been a hero. I mean, usually the people that bring it up to me, no, that's not the case.
Do you tell people when you do put them into, like, have like a character that's like loosely based or very based off of them? Do you usually tell them, or do you usually just keep it a secret and see if they figure it out?
I keep it a secret. I have never told anybody that so-and-so, this guy is you. Because they're not always like that true person, it's just like a spin-off of them. But it's kind of fun in my mind to know and not tell anybody.
Now, can you tell us something about your Facebook group? I know there's a lot of writers groups on Facebook. How did you meet the other people you work with? And do you consider yourself a romance writer or a mystery writer? Where would you put yourself in the library?
Romance. I would put myself in romance, even though the first series is called the Nick Spinelli Mystery Series. It's heavier on the romance than the mystery. So I'd put myself in the romance category. The Facebook group, so I met two ladies through another author, I guess is how to put it. We didn't know each other, we knew of each other. And so those two ladies and I got together and we decided we would do this Facebook show. And we were airing it twice a month, and now we went down to once a month. And we thought it would be fun to try to interview a debut author once a month and then a seasoned author once a month. Because we all remembered how, when you're a debut author, how hard it is to get your name out there. So that was how we started. Our goal was to try to get exposure to new authors. Those authors are a little harder to find because they're debut authors. So we struggled with that a little bit. So now we just, we love debut authors, of course, but mostly it's kind of coming down to seasoned authors that have a following. So we air this live on Facebook once a month now. And it's only a half-hour show, and it goes by so quickly. And it's been fun. And the other two ladies, one lives in Florida and one lives in Connecticut. So I've never actually met them in person. So we've kind of.
What is it called in case we want to look it up?
Inside the Romance Buzz. And it can be found in the Writer's Space Facebook page or the Inside the Romance Buzz page. We have it in both places to try to gain a little steam. And so, then I personally go on other people's shows like that as well whenever I have the chance, kind of like what we're doing here today.
Does it cost a lot of money to get started in self-publishing, or is it the kind of thing that can make you money? How does the balance work there?
You need it up front when you self-pub. And actually when you use small traditional publishers, a lot of them won't pay advances, but it doesn't cost you anything when you use those small publishers because it's a revenue share then. So if you don't have the funds to upfront the cost of the cover art, which can range anywhere from a couple $100 to, I'm sure, a couple $1,000. The editing, it's priced per word, so you're gonna pay just under $1,000 for a edit for a 60,000 word book. So you have to have that available. And then if you have to pay a proofreader, that ranges quite a bit. You could pay around $300 for a proofreader after the edit and all of that is done. The mechanics of getting the book up, like on Barnes & Noble or Kobo or Amazon, there's no cost to that, but your time and figuring out how to do it. So I guess if you are going to self-pub, you do need to have a little money to get started, like you would any other businesses.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I see here on the screen, covert exposure, and you have two different title, or covers.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little, because we've noticed in the library that the covers are all similar these days, and they're changing from the past. And I sort of see that influence here in what you've done.
This
How
was
How did that come about?
this was a point I wanted to make today. Then newbies were listening, especially. So Cookies for Santa. All three covers that you see, that is the same book. So when I first sold this to a small publisher, Cookies for Santa, and that cover was what was chosen by the small publisher. This book released right before Christmas. In this book, the hero has to go undercover as Santa to protect his new love interest. And what we found with this book was nobody could see the handcuffs. They could only see the milk and cookies. And every time I did a book signing, I had somebody wanting to buy this for their child. And I thought, well, this is a romance, it's a little steamy, probably should let mom know not to buy this for their child. But everybody thought it was a children's book. They couldn't see the handcuffs or the gun, which seems pretty evident.
Yeah, when you see it, you see it.
Yeah. So this was with a small publisher. They made the choice then to change the cover to the one in the middle, because Christmas then was over, and we had a decent amount of electronic sales, but the paperback not so much. So then they changed it to the one in the middle, and when I got the rights back to the book, which was not that long ago, they had the rights for 5 years. And when I got the rights back, then the illustrated covers seemed to be kind of popular for the mysteries and some of the rom-com romances. And I thought that I had enough humor and enough mystery in here to try an illustrated cover. So this is book 1, there's 3 books in this series, and the other 2 books have 2 different covers. They had one similar to the one in the center, and now they all have illustrated covers.
I was wondering about that.
So that is how that came about. So here at the library, Cookies for Santa is in the catalog. And I know that book 2 is in the catalog, but I think it's with the second cover. But anyhow, so that's another thing, yourself, how do you get control over the covers?
Do you find a difference you mentioned the mothers buying the first one, trying to buy the first one, but do you think it makes a difference? What cover you have, a big difference, or?
I do in a way. I think that I've probably sold more of the third cover than anything, but that could be the fact that it left the publisher and then it got in my hands, and then I could do different kinds of promotion with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was the cover that really sold it or if it was the promotion. It's a hard business to figure that out. So
It's such a learning curve to becoming an author, isn't it?
yeah, it's been interesting.
Does writing make you feel energized or tired, exhausted?
Can be both.
Can be both.
When you know where you're going and it's really fixed in your head, the scene, it goes really quickly. But then sometimes you get these little roadblocks where it's like, I know I have to get over here, but I gotta get some drama in this book to get me over there or something. So that can sometimes take a while. Sometimes on a Saturday morning I'll sit there, I'm always hoping to get at least 3,000 words on a Saturday. That doesn't always happen, but I had one recently and it was between 5,000 and 6,000 words because it was just a part of the story that was already figured out in my head and I just needed to get it on paper. Sometimes I stare at my computer screen in the morning before work and I get 200 words. So, I don't know.
Is it something that you just feel driven to do? Like, is it spiritual in a way, or is it work? Sometimes when you really love something, you go into this sort of zone, they call it, or whatever. How do you approach it? Like, you have to write now, or you just get carried away?
Both.
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 Yeah.
When I first started this, it was really relaxing to me, and looking back, it's like, how did I ever start this? But I just kind of wrote to relax. When it becomes work is when you set yourself some deadlines, and then it becomes harder to do. And I'm glad you asked that question, because it reminds me of how I actually got started. I should not even share this, but I'm going to. I was not much of a reader until I was about 40 years old. And then, for whatever reason, I started to have a little time on my hands, and I picked up a Janet Ivanovich book.
Oh, yes.
At that point, I think she was on, I don't know, 9, 10, whatever.
Yeah.
So, the person who loaned me the book, they loaned me book 2. I did not know that. I took book 2 home, and I read it in like 2 days. And I thought Ivanovich was the best thing ever. But as I'm reading this, I start to think, I bet there's a book 1. I bet she didn't tell me there's a book 1. I'm gonna call her. So I call her, and I said, is there a book before this one? And she's like, oh yeah. I'm like, why would you do that to a person? I have to read in order. I've discovered I so have to read in order.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is just the meanest thing that you could ever do. And she laughs and she said, I got book 1. So I take book 1. And at that time she had whatever number Ivanovich was on. So I read them all. And then I blogged like 50 books that first year. Wow. So I said to this same friend at one point, I said, you know, I have this great idea for Janet Ivanovich. If I could just call her, I would tell her my idea, and she would so want to write Nick Spinelli. And my friend said, or, Val, you could just write the book yourself. And I thought, all right. So I did.
And what's fun is someone compared you to me to Janet Ivanovich.
Really?
Yes.
That is about the best compliment I could get.
It's true.
I read everything she writes. She wrote romance before she did those Stephanie Plum ones. So there's I got them all from here. At the library here. She's funny. They're not real heavy books. I like, when you work all day, I like to read a little bit of fluff.
Yes.
And so Ivanovich provides that for me. Oh, that's awesome that someone compared me.
What do you think would be really hitting the big time success for you? Is getting one of those big 6 publishers, or
To get an agent and a big publisher, that would be a success to me. But I haven't tried that for a while, so I probably have to try again. That would be the icing on the cake. I always say when I retire, I'll have a little more time for those kinds of things. But my groove right now is the self-pubbing, and it kind of works for me. Building my backlist is what I call it.
do you have a lot of books that have not been published yet, or do you really pretty much publish them as you go?
I publish them as I go. I do have one that is done, and I kind of keep, forgetting about it is not the right way to say it, but it always hits the back burner. So close to being ready, and I keep tossing it aside because I wanted to finish some of the series that I started. There's a whole bunch of reasons that I started different series all the time rather than just stayed in my lane for a while. So yeah, there's one sitting on the shelf. It'll come out eventually. I'll have to change the dates because I think I referenced things that are way out of date now in it. So
Going off of that, actually, you mentioned that there's a book you have finished and such. Do you have pieces just sitting around with like just pieces of ideas that you hope to use in the future, or are there some ideas that you're still waiting to put into a book, it just hasn't happened yet?
I do have pieces, not many, but there are a couple files that I've started for a future series. And when I think of something, I'll actually, if I have a whole scene, I'll write the whole scene. Or sometimes I'll just have notes that I want to come back to. And the book that I'm currently working on is the 3rd and final book in a series. And then I have one more series to finish up, and then I'm going to start something. Time to start something new.
So will it be another book in that after Fraudulent Encounters, or
Nope.
in Sturgeon Bay?
A Fraudulent Encounter is the last book in that series.
Okay,
And that's the way I feel today, but I self-published, so I can make that decision anytime I want.
yeah.
The one I have to finish up is the third book in the Missing series, what I call the Missing series. That's what I'm working on now to finish up, and those are set in Kentucky. But it's a very similar small county like this. A lot of mine are small town, because that's what I know. So I find it hard to write something city-wise, even though the Spinelli ones do start in Milwaukee. But I bring the third Spinelli back to Door County during the St. Patrick's Day weekend to enjoy the festivities.
Do you know, have you been to Kentucky a lot then, or do you just choose it because you think it'd be an interesting environment?
It started as a group project, so there were, gosh, I think almost 20 authors, and we decided we were gonna write in the same world. And the person who organized it set Kentucky. And I passed through Kentucky, I think it's a beautiful state, so I was a little bit familiar. And so because it started as a group project, I didn't have full control over some of those things about setting, but I also feel like I got finished. The group has fallen apart, not everybody writes in it anymore, but I wanted that third book to at least bring.
So you do have a story in a book I remember seeing with a bunch of other authors. How did that come about?
There was, somebody organized a group where we all were just given a few requirements, if I'm thinking of the right one. It was kind of a promo, it was our shot at getting a promotion. So I don't remember how many authors were in it, but there was a whole lot of authors. And the whole idea behind that is you write your short story, you put it in, and you're hoping that those 20 other authors, that their people will read your book and then you'll gain new readers. So sometimes that's how those things, or why we do those things. But I took that's a short story, and that one is set at Peninsula Park. If we're talking about the same one, because I did that twice.
Frozen, is it called, or something?
Oh, that's a different one.
So there's more than one.
Yes, so that was the second group that I worked with. So the one you're referring to, it was the publisher who first had the Spinelli books organized a Christmas anthology. And then they asked a few of us just to write a short story in it. And they just thought it would, I think, just be fun to have. I think that one maybe had 10 authors in it. So our requirements are it has to be under so many words because you didn't want the book to get really big. So, yep, I wrote that Christmas story. It was a snowmobile story. Again, set up my cabin in the UP where I've been going since 1989. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. And, hopefully you'll gain readers from the other authors as well.
And does your family support this writing? Or do they think it takes too much of your time?
They've always supported it. They think they're helpers sometimes, and sometimes they're not helpers, but they think they're helpers with their ideas. But they've all been good about it because it does take time. So on Saturday morning, I might be in my computer room with my door shut and everything else is going on in the living room. And I come out. If I'm on a writing streak, I probably won't come out of that room for a while. But they're all older. They can do it.
You mentioned that a lot of the fire people and the police give you ideas. Do they read the books, or they just know that you write and they come up with ideas?
I'm doubting any of them ever read it. But there are people that I work with that have supported me by buying the books. I can't say anybody in those departments, but I think they think it's fun sometimes.
Yeah.
Just to talk about it or whatever.
Yeah.
And to flesh out some ideas. So it's kind of good to be with those people because they will know things, procedural things.
Absolutely, and that's what's so much fun with Fraudulent Encounters is learning some of the backroom things about the safe and the keys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't have told so much.
Well, yeah, everyone in the business would know, in that type of department would know already, right? But it is very interesting to me. And let's see, do you have any more questions? Well, I thank you very much for coming. Have we finished with the slides, or?
I was just putting them up as we went along, just to
And you said you use your computer and do you Word? Do you use other things like any of those suites that are online?
Actually, recently I have started using Pro Writing Aid.
What is that?
It's like a Grammarly,
Oh,
and it helps edit as I'm going along. It's actually quite fabulous. And I don't even know all the ins and outs of it yet, but that would be another thing I would suggest to someone who was starting out, to at least use Grammarly or get something else like that. Because the cleaner that your manuscript is, the less you're at good cost.
I see, yeah.
So, yeah.
And have you heard about these, it's in the news a lot these days, Chat GPT for Microsoft and Bard for Google, where they write things for you? Have you thought of using that as a tool to get ideas?
No, I have not.
AI, isn't it?
I tried it out, my son is in IT and he got me to learn about it, so I tried out the Chat GPT, which is, I think Microsoft based. And basically you say to it, I've done poems, write a poem about Sturgeon Bay, and then it writes a poem for you, and it's usually quite a few lines.
Huh.
So you don't necessarily wanna use that, what it comes up with, but it might give you some interesting ideas to throw them out there.
I've not tried it
Yeah.
yet. But
That's the way of the future.
right, but what you just said is kind of what I said earlier. You talk about things or you do that because it gives you ideas.
Mhm.
You can take another twist on it, so.
So do you think you'll ever write fantasy science fiction or stick with the romance mysteries?
I think I better stick with what I know, the romance mysteries. I have a friend who writes sci-fi and I just admire his mind
Mhm.
because I don't know how they think of some of that stuff.
Yeah.
It would be fun to try, but I don't know that I could be believable.
And you work with Right on Door County here?
Mhm. Yeah, I was introduced to Right on Door County very early in this process. Jared Stanek from there reached out to me on the first book that I wrote. And a year ago, a little better than a year ago, I went on to their board now. So it's a great organization.
Mhm.
I can't say enough good about Right on Door County because they also have resources for writers, of course. New writers, seasoned writers, there's always classes, webinars, even the conference, they do that one up on Washington Island.
Mhm.
So it's great and I can't imagine.
We're very fortunate to have that here.
I believe they have two coming up for Dark County Reads. I believe there's a writing, there's two writings, I believe this Saturday is one of them, and then there's another one happening this week.
There's quite a few things going on. They have an events calendar on their website in case anybody's interested in learning more. And I think they do a really good job accommodating writers of all levels in all different kinds of things.
Mhm.
In poetry, memoirs, fiction, nonfiction, they're covering it all, which is great.
Well, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but Hallmark, his movies are so popular here in the library. Would that be a sign of success for you if you had one of your books turned into a Hallmark movie?
That would be a big sign of success for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read anything by Nancy Nagel. She is the queen of Hallmark movies.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege to meet Nancy, and she actually took over my Facebook page in December when she was promoting her new Christmas book and her Hallmark movie, and it was fabulous, and people love her.
Mhm.
And she was a guest one time on Inside the Romance Buzz with
Oh, I
us as
think
well.
yeah, a lot of we had like 49 Christmas movies here, and they went out constantly, so that would be something to aim for, I would say.
That would be fabulous.
And it does remind me of your book, Fraudulent Encounters, because the ending is very uplifting, I think, after the mystery and everything. So it kind of reminds me of that kind of good feeling at the end.
Your
which was
standard romances have to end with a happy ever after. Or happy for now.
Yeah.
There are some romance authors who don't do that, and then that leads into their book too. And I think either people really love them or they get very upset by that. So I don't know. But mine will generally have the HEA. That's my plan going forward, and that would be a Hallmark movie type, you know.
Well, I enjoyed the ending. Thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you.
This talk.
Thank you for having me. It was great.